have pretty well most members here. So let's welcome everyone. I guess this is our third virtual session. We'll probably end up doing another one in June, the way it's looking, but who knows? So let's start off with the approval of the minutes. Have everyone had a chance to review those? They're pretty extensive. Any comments on the minutes or modifications?
No.
Hearing none. Have someone
All good.
motion to move them and a seconder?
I'll move. Eric.
Eric? Okay.
Betsy will second.
Eric and Betsy. Okay, great. Okay, Chris, review the day's agenda. I think you've sort of made reference to it, but we only have the one item, which again is really a major item. But as you said, the height and densities and massing have all been approved, so we're going to stay away from that and focus our comments on public realm, ground plane, landscaping, sustainability, perhaps heritage, and we'll see what else comes up. With respect to any declarations of conflict from any members?
Well, Paul, you got my message ahead of the meeting.
Yes, I did. Thanks, George.
Okay, so I will not be participating.
Okay.
And I'm going to not participate in the Promontory Park.
Okay, who was that? Sorry?
Sorry, Jana.
Jana, okay. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No?
Well, actually, I won't be participating in the park conversation either because I have to leave early. It's the only reason. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's been noted. Chris, report back on last month's projects. Probably have some slides.
Well, maybe before I jump into that, we should also introduce, we do have a new panel member who is on the call, I believe, which is Kevin Stelzer. So welcome, Kevin. We're very happy to have you. Kevin has had a really interesting career in what I call sustainability. He prior to he now has his own consulting firm and called Inform, and before that he was at Brooke McElroy, and before that he was at B&H for quite a while, and he's really become, I think, one of the leading sort of building science experts because of his interest in energy efficiency. He was part of the Canada Green Building Council and is very familiar with Toronto's green building standards. He's very highly regarded at the city, and I feel he's going to help bring even more weight into the review of building system designs. I will confess that part of what I've always wanted somebody like Kevin on the panel, because we have a spot for someone like that. But given the ambitions that Sidewalk Labs had, I thought it was even more important that we get somebody who's spent a lot of time doing things like Passive House and other systems. So we're very excited to have Kevin join us. So I feel like we're now up to 3 people who can claim to have focused a chunk of their career on sustainability and innovation. I mean, everyone has to some extent, but I think we've got some real expertise.
Kevin, can you
welcome, Kevin.
Introduce yourself?
Yeah, are you there, Kevin?
I'm right here. Yeah.
Great.
Turn
You
your
want to say a
camera
couple
on.
of words?
Well, thank you very much for that great intro. Really appreciate that, and I feel very privileged to be here. So, I think there's a lot of great work that has been going on here, and I'm very, very passionate about high performance buildings, and I just want to kind of offer a strong support vis-a-vis, for example, integration, systems design. I think that the city's green standard is a good one, and I support it, and I've studied it, and I just want to help the candidates or the proponents here achieve the highest levels of performance that they can. So it's a support role, and again, I'm really happy to be here.
Great.
Oh, this is George. Can I just say, I think I'm the only panel member that hasn't welcomed Kevin to the panel, so I'd like to fill in that hole. Welcome.
Thank you, kind sir. I appreciate it.
Warmly welcomed by everyone, and this is a perfect place for you to start with 55 Lakeshore, Kevin.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Welcome, Kevin. It's Nina Marie. I don't think I answered the reply all email, but welcome.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it very much. Yeah.
Okay, great. Look forward to your comments. Okay, Chris, do you have some slides you want to share with us?
I guess I do. Leon,
Yeah.
you want to control them, or can I? Yeah, you can just run through them. Okay, so the 3C project, that received full support at the last review. I thought it was a great review. I thought we really worked well with this proponent, and I felt like they tried hard to be responsive. And with that vote of full support, they're now finished with their DRP process, so they are cleared to move on. Next slide, please. And the Portland's flood protection, the parks, that was also a detailed design review. And we also gave them a vote of full support. So again, they're not, they won't be coming back to the panel because they have finished the process. The only caveat there is if something changes dramatically again, because this project has had to change a couple of times in response to geotech conditions that have been discovered during excavation. So if there's a big shift, it has to, I hope there isn't, because we're going to run out of budget for this, but hopefully we don't have to do another redesign. If we do, we'll bring it back, but if not, I think they are also finished. So good, we gave 2 thumbs ups to final projects last time. Next slide. And then I wanted to talk about Quayside. I'm not going to read what's here, but this is some excerpts from the statement that Steve Diamond made. I think, you know, Sidewalk has decided to pull out of the Quayside project. It's disappointing on a number of levels. I feel that, you know, as we worked through the process with them, the project was getting more and more shaped into something that we were starting to feel really excited about. I feel like we were addressing a lot of the privacy concerns, and at the same time, you know, getting the public realm proposals much better aligned with Waterfront Toronto's position on public realm. And they were committed to pursuing this tall timber community, which would have been a very unique proposition, really anywhere in the world. Even if they hadn't been proposing to build a factory, the factory was sort of icing on the cake from our point of view, but could have started a manufacturing industry. So I think, you know, those things are clearly losses, but, you know, their reasons for pulling out, I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it. And maybe not the pandemic per se, but the perceived impact on real estate values. One of the things we'd negotiated with them was that they would pay full market value for this site, which I think was always a bit of a stress on their pro forma, and I think had already led to them starting to kind of pare back some of the ambitions, which was not a bad thing because they started with, I would say, too many ambitions, and focusing in on some of those key ones was a good exercise for them and was good for that project. But it was also a bit of an economic necessity. And I think they were always tight on being able to make it work. And I think that once the pandemic started and real estate prices became a little less certain, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for them. And they, you know, they also were reliant on Alphabet, Google's parent company, to financially backstop everything. And Google has been in a bit of a retrenchment mode. They lost a lot of stock value in the pandemic. They have a new CFO who I think is a little bit less interested in some of the more far-flung experiments that were being pursued by the company and wants them to focus a little more on their core mandate. So, you know, those 2 reasons there, I think, just made it not possible for them to continue. So, you know, in a way, it's not the worst way for us to part ways. You It's really not because parties couldn't come to an agreement. It's not because there was, frustration with Toronto or that Toronto isn't bold enough. I don't think it was any of those things. It's really circumstance and their sort of level of ambition relative to their ability to deliver it. So we're sad to see them go, but we will be regrouping, and we will still go out with a new RFP, this time most likely for a development partner. I don't think we will look for an innovation partner again. But we have learned a lot from this experience, and we will build in a lot of the learnings into whatever that RFP looks like, so that we have a pretty clear sense of what we're asking for and what we hope to achieve, and we can be more clear at the outset than we were with Sidewalk in terms of what our expectations are.
The one thing we could take out of this, Chris, would be some of the objectives of Sidewalk were laudable.
Yeah.
Can we embed some of those objectives in the next call?
Exactly. That's exactly what we want to do. And so we're going to be consulting a fair bit with people as to what objectives from their proposal should we include in the RFP going forward. And so we will be running that by you guys too. We can
even credit them. We can even say, from the Sidewalk experience, we've added these criteria into the call for the next stage, and we could give them a pat on the back on the exit.
Yeah, and I have to say they've been very gracious throughout this whole process, and very thankful to us for all the time we spent working with them. And I think they've already expressed a willingness to let us run with some of their ideas if we think that they're things we want to implement. Wow. So I don't think there'll be a problem there, and I think we'd be happy to acknowledge where they made a contribution.
I second that. This is Betsy. I think that is something that we is highly beneficial to Waterfront Toronto moving forward, are some of these initiatives. And it was the first thing I thought of when I heard that they were pulling out was, what are the great things that we can bring forward to the next proponent in that area?
Yeah, and some of them we may not be able to mandate. I mean, I don't know that we'll ever find a developer who wants to do an all tall timber community again. So we may have to modify our aspirations with regards to that. But I think having some aspirations around timber and having some of the same aspirations around sustainability and passive house, I think will make a lot of sense to carry forward. And the development community is already calling us. And, you may recall throughout this process, a lot of members of the development community said, if you gave us an opportunity to build tall timber, we would have done it. Of course, they had the opportunity to bid on the RFP, but the RFP didn't really, wasn't that specific about what we were looking for, which I think is why maybe they didn't respond. But I think with the expectations made clear, I think the development community wants to step up. So I'm still pretty optimistic we're going to get something pretty innovative and great on this site, but it's going to take a little longer to get there.
Let's everybody remember.
Make into the RFP that you send out some incentive or bonusing or, ability to seek out a timber proposal?
Well, we have always discounted our land value modestly to help make it economically feasible to incorporate innovation. So we may do something like that. We'll explore lots of different options as to ways that we can incentivize it and make it happen, whether it's bonusing or something else. We will certainly give that some serious consideration, because I don't think these things will happen at without some of that relief.
Yes,
and so while we were getting fair market value for the land from Sidewalk, we were then reinvesting some of that money into certain innovations that we were interested in. So we were in effect still providing some economic offset for some of the innovations, which was consistent with what we do everywhere. We always take a modest discount on the land value to achieve those social objectives.
Chris, I would have one question. Could you talk 30 seconds about the public realm? Because during the presentation that we have had, we sensed there was some conflictual vision coming along, and I think Waterfront, I probably have learned something quite interesting about this whole process of how you would like to guide the vision that we have been shaping for the last 15 years, and how then we protect and enhance that through the kind of a maybe more clear direction of what you want it to be headed towards instead of being too open.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, Claude. It won't be open. I think one of the lessons we've learned here is that we need to retain full control over the areas where we have strength, and in all our conversations.
Great. Okay.
We are not going to include the public realm as part of the developer responsibility. We will own that.
Excellent.
Chris, I just wondered, given what you've said, what the thinking of the board is. This RFP sort of on the horizon for the fall or next year or what?
We don't know yet. There's a lot of difference of opinion about that right now, given COVID, like what the right timing is. So I really can't say at this point. We have not chosen a date by any stretch.
Okay.
I think everybody has to remember in the development industry, this is one of the most exciting development sites in Canada, and the opportunity is immense. So if we put some requirements on that around sustainability or low carbon construction, they're going to accept that. There's going to be lots of bidders.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great benefits from the sidewalk exercise is everybody knows this site now.
That's for sure.
Yeah, in fact, that's not a small thing. I think some of the greatest projects never get built because they spur ideas that become formed into something that we can accept and that actually really push innovation in a way that the regular RFP can never do. So I appreciate very much the energy and ambition that went into this project and the learning curve on which we all are together. So what comes out of this, I think, is, as you say, Chris, it's really worth emphasizing the lessons learned, that it will actually help shape innovation in the direction that capitalizes on what Waterfront Toronto has been doing for the last 15 years. The public realm piece in particular, and the recognition of how these projects stitch together to create not only the whole, but also to actually spur further innovation associated projects. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Sorry,
anything else?
I just dropped off for the last few seconds there. Yeah, I mean, I would ask everyone on the panel to think about what elements of that proposal you think we should carry forward. And I think at a future panel meeting, we should have a discussion around that, because we're going to go out to stakeholders in the public and ask them the same thing. And we absolutely want to hear from you guys. So, dust off those books that you all got copies of, and take a look through and, come up with your own list of things you think Waterfront Toronto should consider including.
Yeah, 1,500 pages, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can skim it, Peter.
Keep the front door stop. Yeah, keep the front door open currently.
What's that?
Okay.
It's keeping my front door open at the moment.
Oh, okay. So you're putting it to good use. That's great.
No, I think, Chris, everybody welcomes that opportunity. And when the dates and timing is a little clearer, maybe we could set aside a specific piece of a meeting to have that kind of discussion.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just don't want to let it just drift off. Let's actually bear down and focus.
Put it on the agenda for the next meeting. Put it on.
I think we. Yeah, let's. I think. Yeah, I don't know if we even need to wait. Like, we can at least have a preliminary conversation, and then maybe once we have something drafted up, we can come back with a follow-up as to how we are proposing to respond.
Yeah.
Can we then try and get something on that for June or the July meeting before the August break?
Yeah, I think we should.
That'd be great.
Okay, we'll leave it in your hands then.
Okay.
Okay, anything else, Chris, you want to cover?
No, I think that's it. Actually, do I have more, Leon?
Yeah, you have a couple more slides. Oh my God,
I'm so behind today. I'm so sorry. Let me rip through these. So Portland's flood protection. We have basically now finished the cutoff walls and the slurry walls. I don't know if any of you followed our blog, but we had this digging instrument that we called Rocky the Ripper, and you see him there with his googly eyes. He has been ripping the slurry wall trough that you see in green. So he is now done, and he has also, or no, we have also finished the steel and concrete cutoff walls, which are in blue. So we have basically structurally reinforced the river channel now, and we're beginning the deep excavation. So we are moving into a new and exciting phase of the project.
Great.
So we keep going. The Cherry Street Stormwater Treatment Facility, the concrete is all poured. We just had a site visit the other day. We're not entirely happy with the quality of the concrete, but I think we have a plan for sandblasting that Scott has been involved in. It's a pretty incredible building. I mean, whether you're happy with the concrete or not, it's a very striking form, and the equipment in it is really pretty awesome to look at. These huge pipes handling these huge volumes of stormwater. And the design has some big open windows where the public will be able to look in and actually see the system going on in there. I think this is expected to be done in November 2020. May go a little longer, but it is cranking along. Okay, next slide. And Lakeshore Public Realm, we are moving ahead with our pilot project. You see a little ripped up area of pavement there. That's where we're starting construction this summer. So we're going to be testing out the bioretention planting, passive stormwater irrigation, permeable pavers with the permavoid subbase, and an exposed aggregate concrete finish, which you can kind of see in the mock-ups there in the inset photo. So it's a small test bed, but I think this is exciting. And this was something that was actually recommended by the panel that we pilot this. And Sonia on our team has actually worked really hard at getting us some grant funding for this and getting city staff through the approval process. So while it is small, it has been a pretty significant feat. So I'm actually very excited that we're testing this out. Okay, next slide, please. And contact photography, you know, we were lucky enough to be selected to be in it, or who was selected was Vid and Ryan, who are the two photographers we hired to photo document the whole PLFP project. So there's a large-scale temporary public art installation meant to go up on the S-Rock silos and the median along Villiers. Unfortunately, the real-life version of this exhibit has been postponed because of COVID. The Contact has created a website now for all of the exhibits so they can all be experienced virtually. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be publishing a series of online photo stories featuring some of their buildings. The Contact website info is here if you want to check it out. This is a screenshot of what one of Vid and Ryan's photos looks like on the Contact site. So it's unfortunate that this isn't happening in real life. This is going to be very exciting because they were going to be very large photo repros in the Portlands. But the photos are great and they're really worth flipping through. Okay, next slide, please. And this is what our draft agenda looks like thus far for June. So we may have a slot for talking about Quayside. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. But looking at the PIC-Core urban design guidelines, that's basically the film studio area. The data center, which we looked at a few months ago, is getting ready to come back. The Lakeshore East Public Realm, the overall scheme for that will be coming back. And the 215 Lakeshore Boulevard phase 2. So should be a fuller agenda than this month in June. Next slide. Is that it?
I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, I apologize that I've run so far over. I apologize to our proponents because I see they're all here waiting.
Chris, can I just mention one thing? Leon sent around the Globe and Mail op-ed and Declaration for Resilience in Canadian Cities. Many panel members have already signed it. There's over 100 signatures from across the country so far. It's about 20 steps that municipalities across Canada can take now to ensure that we don't just revert back to the old normal after the pandemic. So I just commend everybody to please read it. If you feel comfortable, please sign it. Signatures are coming in daily as we speak. I think it's an opportunity that we just didn't want to miss.
Hey, Paul, it's just a fantastic piece, and you know, it captures the moment and the opportunity. It's very important, and to, you know, you and all the other authors that put it together, it's excellent. We picked it up as a firm, and we're pushing it internationally.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. I think several members, as I said in the panel, have already signed. So others who haven't, chance of a lifetime. So please join in. Okay. Let's move on to 55 Lakeshore. I believe Carolyn Kim, are you there somewhere to
Yes, I
introduce
am.
us?
Good
Okay.
morning.
Paul, I think you should just welcome the city panel members who are here.
Yes, okay. I'm not sure they're all part of this yet, but I'm pleased to welcome 3 panel members from the city panel: Michael Leakum, Carl Blanchard, and Heather Rolston. I believe you were part of the review several years ago, at least some of you were, and we welcome you to join this today. Just procedurally, we're going to follow the same process as we did last time, in that the city panel members will be able to fully participate in the questions and commentary, but not the actual voting process. The actual votes are restricted to the waterfront panel. So I just want to re-emphasize that. Okay, so over to you, Carolyn, if you're ready.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Caroline Kim, and I am the Urban Design Project Manager for Waterfront Toronto. Today's project discussion will be on Block 4 for 55 Lakeshore Boulevard East. The proponent is Menkes, and the design team includes Architects Alliance, NAC Design, and GBCA. This project is in the review stage of schematic design. I also like to note from the city, I have Nader Kadri, who's the community planner for this application, and Ran Chan, the senior urban designer. Next slide, please. Block 4 is located between Lakeshore Boulevard East to the north, Cooper Street to the east, the new Harbor Street extension to the south, and Freeland Street to the west. It is the final of the 4 blocks, with Block 1 located in the southeast quadrant, Block 2 in the northeast quadrant, and Block 3 in the southwest quadrant, which will be the city-owned park. Next slide, please. Block 4 is known as LCBO lands for housing the existing LCBO building, and that is listed under the Heritage Register. The proposed massing is in accordance with the approved settlement in 2018 and is in full compliance with the site-specific zoning bylaw. Block 1 came to the DRP last November 2016, and Block 2 was not reviewed. In terms of the project timelines, in September 2019, an OPA and zoning LPAT order was issued. In September 2019, the SPA submission. In the first quarter of 2022 is the target construction start, and 2027 is the target construction end, which is approximately 5 years. Next slide, please. In terms of the project background for Block 4, with regards to the towers, there are 3 residential towers with a height of 79, 87, and 90 stories, 2,705 market units, and 196 affordable units. The towers are set on top of 2 mixed-use podiums with various preserved and reintegrated elements from the existing LCBO office and warehouse building. With regards to the podium, the north podium contains the residential lobbies and amenity spaces for the market condo units and the affordable housing units. The south podium contains daycare and public schools, which is pending approval from TDSB and the ministry. And it should be noted that TDSB will require approval from the Ministry of Education with regards to not being able to meet the requirements of providing exclusive outdoor use. The area between the north and south podium buildings will be developed as a shared street and provide a mid-block pedestrian connection. In terms of the indoor connections, Block 2 is connected by underground tunnel to Block 4, and there is a connection to the path to be secured via separate process. Next slide, please. With the site context, there's 3 photos showing the existing condition. The first photo to your left is looking southeast from Lake Shore. The photo to the bottom is looking northeast from Freeland Street, and the photo to your right is looking northeast from Cooperage Street. Next slide, please. With the transportation and street network, this is from the Lower Young Precinct Plan, which was done in 2016. As you can see in the purple dash line horizontally, that's the extension of Harbor Street, which is the new Harbor Street. And then the dashed purple vertical line will be a new street called New Street for now. Next slide, please. With street types, Block 4 is again surrounded by Lake Shore to the north, which we will speak to in the next few slides. Freeland Street to the west, which is allocated as a neighborhood street in the Lower Young Precinct Plan. Harbor Street to the south, which is allocated as a local main street, and Cooper Street to the east, which is allocated as a promenade street. Next slide, please. And this is again from the Lower Young Precinct Plan 2016, the public realm with mid-block connections. And as you can see in Block 4, there is the Heritage Muse that is being proposed between the existing 2 buildings, the warehouse and office. Next slide, please. Public art plan, again from the Lower Young Precinct Precinct Plan, allocates nodes and areas of public art to be considered. Next slide, please. And this is the Lakeshore public realm. The planting zones between the sidewalk and road with curb cuts and subdrains for passive irrigation and resilient planting. The street trees with soil cells, permeable unit pavers and granite curves, and enhanced exposed aggregate concrete at intersection corners. It also should be noted that this is the ultimate condition and that this is being led by a separate process with Waterfront Toronto and the city. Next slide, please. For project approval stage. In terms of the project approval stage, this SPA is following Stream 1 for private lands, but should also be noted that the lands are owned by LCPO, which is provincial. Next slide. Before I speak to the recap from the November 2016 DRP session, it is important to note, can someone mute, please? In feedback. Thank you. It is important to note. Leon, are you hearing the feedback too?
No,
Okay.
I hear a little, but
a little bit.
Try again, Caroline.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is important to note that the panel's comments were reflective of blocks 1 to 4 and that this review only pertains to block 4. With the comments, I'm going to speak to them. For the first comment, there should be more mid-block porosity at grade to provide connections through the site, and these should be coordinated through the precinct to the extent possible. This has been addressed. The mid-block connections provided through Heritage Muse. The form has been secured through the LPAC. The next comment, the retail building on the park block is not supported, and any retail pavilion proposed there should be designed as part of the park. This has been addressed. The retail building has been removed. The city's parks department has acquired the sliver of land that abuts Harbor Street. Comment, the design of the park should happen concurrently with the design of the buildings and be led by Waterfront Toronto or the city. This is underway, it's being city-led. This design of the park will occur at a later stage through a city-led process. Details of these pieces are still unfolding and include discussions with TDSB on the shared use of space. Comment, the Heritage Muse needs to be made into a prime public space. This is underway. The Heritage Muse is publicly accessible and includes primary building entrances and retail uses. Comment, the public realm plan in the Lower Young Precinct Plan needs to be shown on the drawings and the relationship between the buildings and the street more strongly conceived. This is underway. Key streets such as Lakeshore Boulevard East, Harbor Street, Freeland Street, and Cooper Street will be designed to Waterfront Toronto standards in accordance with the public realm plan. Interim conditions for Lakeshore Boulevard East have also been reviewed through the site plan process. Next comment, second level bridge connections are not supported except over Lakeshore Boulevard because of their visual impacts and potential reduction in pedestrian activity at street level. This is underway. The second level bridge above Freeland Street has been secured as it provides a safe crossing between the school and the community center, which will have a range of amenities. The second level bridge above Harbor Street is still being contemplated at this point in time. Additional discussions with TDSB are underway to explore alternative solutions for at-grade crossing. Next slide. And these are the areas for panel consideration, and this is consolidated from the city and from Waterfront Toronto. For landscape and public realm plan, does this development provide a generous and seamlessly connected public realm network that supports the heritage resources on site and the implementation of the Lower Yonge public realm plan? Does the landscape design contribute to design excellence, placemaking, and the shaping of the block's identity? For ground plane and pedestrian interface, does the development provide an animated, accessible, welcoming, and safe ground plane that supports the multiple functions of the uses at grade and the foreseeable pedestrian flow in these spaces? Does the podium design and materiality respond appropriately to the surrounding public realm network and meet the landscape in a suitable manner? For sustainability, is this proposal providing an integrated approach to achieve an adequate level of sustainability, and are there other environmental strategies that can be considered? Last question, are there opportunities for the sustainable targets to exceed minimum standards and requirements? And now I will turn it to Peter Clues from Architects Alliance.
Thank you, Caroline. So I'll try and go through this quickly. There's a lot of information here. I also have today with me, or virtually, is Craig McIntyre from EQ, Sabella from NAC, and Chris Boigel for Heritage. So as Caroline said, this was last reviewed 4 years ago, which is quite extraordinary. It was the master plan development. Subsequent to that, we made a series of changes on that master plan. The principal one being, as Caroline said, the introduction of the pedestrian muse from Freeland to Cooper Street. And just by way of context, because it's been 4 years since the panel, and some of you were on the panel at that time, some of you were new, I just want to give you a bit of context in terms of what the precinct plan called for. So it asked for a balance of residential, non-residential uses, including employment. At least 25 to 40% would be non-residential. Harbor Street would be designated as a principal retail street, and a mix of residential unit sizes, tenure, and affordability. So that is all being done now in terms of there is an office building under construction on block 1. There's a whole, there's a school going in, there's affordable housing and so forth, which I will get to. The other tricky part of this project is the interconnection with the path system limiting connections at grade or below grade with the exception of Lakeshore. So in terms of the path system, as Caroline mentioned, we are proposing an over street bridge on Freeland. That's because there's a community center being built in the Pinnacle project to the west, and the school that is intended to go into block 4 needs to share those community facilities such as gymnasiums and so forth, and that the school board and other officials feel that it's paramount that there's a bridge there. So it's currently shown on our design. The balance of the path connections that go through 4 to and end up at block 1, which is where the office building is currently under construction, are all above grade or below grade. There are no other bridges proposed transiting streets. So really the way this works is you come in from the west, above grade, sort of notionally on the 2nd floor, you move eastward across block 4, And then you take an escalator down to grade and below grade. You can either transit across Cooper at grade or below grade and into block 2, where you pop back up, or you stay down and you pop back up into block 1. Also part of the context, this was all laid out in the precinct plan in terms of base building heights and articulation of those base buildings and pedestrian weather connection and so forth. So these are the heights that we're proposing in all 3 blocks that comply with those base building heights, ranging from 17 meters up to 38 meters on Lakeshore Boulevard. And then tower heights and transitions that the precinct plan asked for. So it asked for generally a height transition down as you move eastward and southward. And so the tower locations were already largely determined by the precinct plan, 3 on block 4 and 2 on block 2. And so these are the proposed heights, from a height of 299 meters down to 219 meters on block 2. Tower setbacks, step backs were required from Harbor and Lakeshore and Freeland, and also 10 meters from any heritage structures. So focusing on block 4, essentially what we're proposing here are 3 towers, towers C, B, and D. They are B and C, which are the taller of the 3 towers, are proposed to be separated by 30 meters, and then a 25-meter tower separation to the tower to the south, which is lower and fronts onto Harbor Street. So this is a massing diagram shown in context with the Pinnacle development to the west of the heights, the various heights of the buildings, and shown from the southeast looking northwest. So you can see the 3 towers proposed adjacent to the Pinnacle development, and then the 2 towers that are currently under construction on block 2, the ones with that kind of graphic pattern on the balconies. And of course, the office buildings under construction. Another precinct plan requirement was that loading access be limited to Freeland and so-called New Street, which is the street on the east edge of the precinct, and to limit that loading access to 6 meters and minimize the number. So what we're proposing here is to have the principal loading, which is now currently under construction, below grade, and it's accessed from the east side of the block 2, and trucks drive down a ramp, and then there's a whole below grade loading area that's servicing blocks 1 and 2. And also block 4, and block 4 also has some limited loading and vehicular parking access off the heritage muse, which I'll show you shortly in some plans. So this basically just shows you sort of a schematic of how that works. So trucks come down New Street on a very long ramp. There's a principal loading area under block 2 at the P1 level. Trucks can also continue down to the P2 level under block 1, the office building, as well as P2 under block 4. There was requirements for ground floor animation, activated uses at grade, a series of minimum percentage of building faces, minimum ground floor heights, minimum widths for lobbies, and facade articulation, which I believe we are adhering to. You guys will be able to judge that. So in terms of the overall organization of the precinct, the pink areas are publicly accessible retail areas. So to the extent we can, we have been putting all the retail on Harbor Street and on either side of Cooper Street. And then Lakeshore Boulevard is the sort of light yellow are residential lobbies, as well as limited lobby exposure on Harbor and on New Street to the east. The last sort of area of that is there's a daycare, which I'll get to, in a school, which have access off Freeland Street on the west side of block 4. So this is just a kind of a composite aerial rendered view of the four blocks with the park. And as Caroline said, the retail pavilion was proposed 4 years ago on the southern edge of Harbor Street, adjacent to the park, has been removed. And that parcel of land has now been, I gather, vended back to the city, or vended to the city to expand the park. And there is potential, it's in under discussion with the school board and others in the city about potentially a bridge that will lead from the school to that park, and that's by far yet to be determined. So what's under construction now was approved with Block 1, the office building. I think that's largely the superstructure's completed. Block 2 is a project that we're doing, which is under construction, and the podiums currently are it's at about the third level structurally, so there's a long way to go. And so on to Block 4. So as Caroline said, one of the challenges of this block is that it's essentially completely occupied by two heritage buildings, and of course complicated by the alignment rather of Harbor Street, which is essentially taking off the kind of southerly 1/3 of that warehouse building. And so just to give you an idea sort of graphically of how this block is organized, because it's a very complex set of different uses. We have residential lobby uses at grade, wrapped around with retail, and then a school entrance off Freeland Street and a daycare to the north of that. The path connection then coming through on the second level of the podium, also with second level retail and the school, and second level residential. Then the school really starts on the third level with residential to the north. Amenity on the fourth level and residential to the north, and then the residential towers above. I won't get into this. I think statistically, a lot of this has been dealt with. Suffice to say that the entire project density on this block proposed right now is about 230,000 square meters. So it's a very, very large project. So these are just more detailed floor plans showing the organization of the block. We are proposing, you can see on a ramp to P1 off this, we call New Street, which is a heritage muse that is running between the two heritage buildings. We're also proposing a loading dock. It's labeled as L on this drawing, 2 loading docks, one on the north side and one on the south side, 3 actually, 2 on the north and 1 on the south. Then a residential lobby entrance to the north building and retail exposure on the south end, as well as the daycare wrapping. So we're trying to animate all the ground floor faces of these buildings, particularly on Harbor, Freeland, Cooper, and the Heritage Muse as much as is possible programmatically. So ground floor plan, retail, daycare. I'm going to go through this very quickly because this would take hours to go through properly. Second floor with retail. The daycare occurs on the second floor at the west side, and it has an exterior play area adjacent to that, as well as the path bridge connects into this from the Pinnacle development to the west. So there's a path connection that transits along the north side of the podium, and then, as I say, turns south and goes down a set of escalators down to grade. As well, there's an original heritage bridge that we will be maintaining that connects back to the existing heritage structure to the north, which is currently LCO's corporate offices. That building will be converted into an affordable housing project with the residential cores of the 2 towers kind of punching through that building. Up on the 3rd floor is the elementary school that basically runs around the perimeter of the building, has an exterior play area also carved out in the southwest corner. The interior of this plate, because it's very deep, will, and not particularly useful for the school, will be given over to residential storage. Again, to the north is the affordable housing project. When you come to the 4th level, is a combined residential amenity area for all 3 towers, indoor and exterior, a series of bridges that then connect back to the towers to the north over the Heritage Muse. Level 5, more residential amenity as well as some residential to the south, completing the podium on level 6, and then we move into the towers. Again, the tower separation distance is 30 meters to towers C and B and 25 to tower D. These are isometric kind of diagrammatic sections trying to really help you understand the complexity of this project sectionally. This is looking through the Heritage Muse Street, looking west. So you can see the Heritage Bridge connecting into the residential to the north, which will occupy that LCBO building, and then the various facilities, daycare and so forth to the south. I'm just mindful of time. I think you received this as a package, so I won't labor on these renderings. Suffice to say, where the towers come in on the north, what we're trying to do is lift those up as high as possible to allow those heritage buildings to read volumetrically and visually. We're putting in a massive transfer system that's 2 stories high above those buildings to transfer the tower structure down into a more organized column structure that will go through. And to the extent possible, trying to create as much visual and physical porosity through the Heritage Muse. Now, coming to sort of the architectural overall expression, because we are having to deal with most of the facades of this block are really heritage facades. So there's very little intervention we can do, and I will be interested in the panel members' comments on that, because we are proposing some minor interventions, but particularly on the south face, because that facade is being removed. We've chosen to essentially glaze the entire southern face of this building to really make a clear visual delineation between what is new and what is existing in terms of the heritage buildings. The potential bridge has been ghosted in over Harbor Street. Again, that's a bridge of some discussion with TDSP and others, whether it should be in or not, or whether there should be a crosswalk at grade on Harbor, and I'll leave that to others to decide in the fullness of time. This also shows on the southwest corner of the building where we're carving out exterior areas both for the daycare and the elementary school on the 3rd floor. Just more of a detailed shot showing continuous weather protection for the retail at grade. Again, what we're trying to do here is create as much transparency and animation as possible to the southern face, 2 levels of retail. Just viewed from Harbor to the south of the park to your back. Again, the bridge ghosted in, potential bridge, and the continuous weather protection and a widened sidewalk along the north side of Harbor. Then coming around to the eastern side of the block, the heritage facade kind of makes an appearance. What we're proposing here, if you recall, this is where we're having proposed escalators coming from the path down to grade and then also continuing down below grade. We're proposing a series of openings in that warehouse facade at grade to try and create a greater sense of visual porosity to this facade. It's a very, very opaque, almost kind of rationalist facade from the 40s or 50s. And so, again, I'd be interested in commentary on that, whether that is a good thing to do or not a good thing. These are just more detailed shots of elevation drawings showing how we're proposing to do that. Similarly, on the east side of the block, or west side of the block, we have the proposed entrance to the elementary school. We're proposing here to carve into that facade with a series of almost like a colonnaded facade to create, again, more porosity, visual porosity and functional porosity through that facade into the entrance to the school, as well as the daycare to the north. Sabella will get into the whole ground plane treatment proposed here in a moment. Accompanying elevation drawing. Then looking down the heritage Muse, what we're trying to show here is, to the extent we can, given the very, very large buildings, how we're trying to, as gracefully as possible, transfer the structure of these 300-meter buildings down and so to thread them through both the heritage buildings and the Muse running through. You can see just on the right-hand side of the image, the bridge coming in from the Pinnacle development to the west, accessing the school and daycare and the path connection. And you can also see the heritage bridge that we are reinstituting, or that is threaded through the columns of the tower above. This is more, and Sabella will talk about this in a moment, but this is more a whimsical idea of the northwest corner where there's a wider public realm given the setback, existing setbacks of those heritage buildings. There's a possibility for public art here. And then as you sort of complete the kind of tour around the block, as you come to the northwest corner, the LCBO office building will be completely, its facade will be completely retained and restored. The windows will be reconstructed and form basically glazing for affordable residential housing project. There's some discussion, and Chris can get into it, about how much we can or should vary the brick of these buildings. They're quite badly weathered, and some may feel that's appropriate, others may feel that they need some help. I'll leave that to your commentary. And then finally, going through the Heritage Muse, what we're trying to do here is animate it as much as possible. This is the residential lobby entrance into the LCBO office building from on the north side. So there would be a residential drop-off here. As well, on the south side of the warehouse building, we're trying to open up the retail so that it has entrances and visibility into that laneway. So I'm going to now turn it over to Sabella, who will talk about the public realm design, and then I'll come back to sustainability. Sabella, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I can be your slide changer for you.
Okay, great. So for the most part, the boulevards within this precinct have been designed according to the Lower Yonge Precinct Concept Plan, incorporating wide pedestrian clearways, street trees, furnishing zones, and waterfront standard concrete paver. Next slide. Harbor Street along the south of this block will have a 5.25 meter pedestrian clearway and a single row of trees. And along Cooper Street, because of the heritage facade, the clearway is only 2.1 meters, and there will be a single row of trees. The entire boulevard will be paved with the gray Silex waterfront standard paver, as was specified in the public Lower Yonge Public Realm Concept Plan. Next slide. Along Lakeshore, we followed the vision from the Gardner East Public Realm Study and have incorporated wide, long planters against the curb and porous impermeable paving. The space along Lakeshore varies, with about 6.5 meters at the west end and just over 11 meters at the east end, so it's quite tapered. And in the center, where the entrance is, the canopy and the walkways create a very narrow area here. So we've introduced a 2.1 meter walkway that works around the entrance and heads west towards Freeland Street. On the south side, we've added planting. On the east side, you can see we've been able to add a second row of trees. And on the west side, we've added larger shrubs and understory planting. Next slide. So along Freeland Street, we have a variety of relationships here. At the north end, there's close to 18 meters from the building face to the curb. And further along the south building, the setback varies from, I think it's about 6.5 meters at the south end, or at the north end at the south end, I'm sorry, and 10 meters at the north end. According to the guidelines, this area is to be paved in concrete, And we feel there's a lost opportunity here. We feel there are some really great spaces here, and that better paving would certainly help animate this area. Next slide. So at the north end, we feel this could be a great little plaza. We've added a big planter at the north end to shelter it from lakeshore. And then we've added a grove of trees with movable chairs and tables to create a flexible area for lounging. We feel this is a great place for art to occur, and we'd like to introduce sort of a light gray mottled paver to just create a bit more character in this area. Next slide. So this is the rendering that shows that plaza, the movable chairs under the canopy of trees. This grouping of trees in the forefront would have a larger understory of shrubs to help create a stronger buffer to lakeshore. Next slide. The southern part of Freeland has a more dense facade with smaller windows, and yet it is the opening for the entrance for a daycare as well as a school. And what we wanted to do was help animate this area with striped paving to create a more interesting area. And we feel those stripes could be useful in penetrating through the openings in the facade to help announce where the school entrance is. We feel this paving would be playful, would be indicative of the school zone, and we would like to carry it further south to Harbor Street to the curb, and it could possibly be extended to show a school crossing to the park. Along this frontage, we've also introduced wood benches of varying heights for school children and parents to gather. Next slide. So this is a rendering showing the paving in shades of grays and yellows and rust browns. It would be going right through those openings in the facade and carrying on to the Harbor Street curb. Next slide. We feel the Muse, the Heritage Muse, can act as a great Nerf-like experience and provide the mid-block connection between Freeland Street and Cooper Street. There is a designated driving zone in the center of 6 meters that will be defined by special pavers. And on the edges, there's a furnishing zone with concrete planters and lights to help keep the cars within that space. Pedestrians will be free to move wherever they like within the space, so it'll be a shared street. On the right, you can see the image of the light we are proposing along this stretch. Next slide. So these are different types of pavers. We are introducing a herringbone pattern in the driving lane, and then a wider, darker charcoal band along the furnishing zone, and then that lighter paver that I had suggested earlier for the plaza would be extending through the whole Muse, defining the pedestrian area. Next slide. So this is a view again looking west through the Heritage Muse at the retail area, showing the benches and the light standards. Next slide. In the center of the Muse on the north side is a residential entrance, and there will be sunlight in this area in the summer months, late morning and early afternoon. And so we've introduced large planters to provide more of a residential feel here, and extensive benches along the front. The planting will be blue beech trees and shade-tolerant shrubs and understory plantings such as hostas and Japanese forest grass. Next slide. Again, here's a view showing that entrance with the Japanese forest grass and the benches in the foreground. Next slide. So the strategy for the street trees is to try to have a monoculture on each street. We're looking at homestead elms on Cooper Street, Kentucky coffee trees along Lakeshore. We'd like to look at tulip trees for Freeland Street and shade master honey locust for Harbor Street. Next slide. And these are just And we would like to introduce river birch within the plaza that people can sit underneath that area. Peter, that's the end of my presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Sabella. So I'm going to briefly take you through some points that have been put together, particularly by Craig McIntyre on sustainability, but then Craig will be available for questions and comment as we go through. So basically, from a sustainability perspective, our client is proposing to achieve the TGS version 3 tier 1 and meeting the bird-friendly requirements of tier 2, and somewhat influenced by Waterfront Toronto's minimum green building standards, including electric vehicle infrastructure, cycling, connectivity, green roofs. They are looking at connection with the Enwave District Energy. No decision has been made at this point. The building will have all suites will be sub-metered in terms of a smart building using high efficiency appliances, bird-friendly glazing, obviously, in terms of the lower portions of the building. Long-term flexibility and in terms of the ground floor heights and structural design, I'll get to that in a moment, and 3-stream recycling. So I just want to talk about sustainability or flexibility. So one of the things we're looking at in its sort of early days here, but one of the issues with the shear wall construction, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, is whereas it's a very efficient form of construction in terms of lateral stability of very tall buildings, it creates inherent inflexibility in terms of long-term design of the building. So for example, I live in a building I designed, and I wish that I had put openings in the shear walls so that I could expand my unit. So what we're proposing here is to do that. This is just more of a diagrammatic approach to how that might work, where if the current market, who knows what the current market is now with everything going on, but it was earlier this year still fairly small affordable units, and if that changes over time, people remain in the building and want to expand, then we're going to try and create a way in which you can start to convert units. One of the things we're proposing under SB 12, the Ontario Building Code, 60% glazing to these buildings. You probably know I'm a big fan of glazed tall buildings. And this slide is just more to talk about, to put tall buildings in context. And so much has been talked about both the amount of glazing and also, and I will come to this in a moment, balconies and thermal bridging. If you do, this is just a simple diagram I put together looking at sort of 3 typologies of residential typologies, a typical detached house, a townhouse, and what I call a single aspect unit in a tall high-rise building. What's interesting about this is that from a perimeter envelope to a floor area, the detached house, when you consider its 4 walls, roof, and basement loss, and in a townhouse, the 2 end walls and roof and basement, it has an envelope to floor area about 2.3, and a house to a townhouse 1.5, and a single aspect unit in a tall, in a high-rise building 0.3. So already these buildings are by nature of envelope area to floor area between 5 and 7 times theoretically more efficient than other residential typologies. So when we look at, and we're proposing 60% glazing, and I would say 60% is a real minimum, and I would like to see more glazing in these buildings. I live in a condominium I designed, and it has more than 60%. I think there's a whole question here about livability and amenity when you actually ask people to live in smaller units. But if you look in the highlighted box under row 8, your single aspect unit, which is highlighted at 60%, if we were to translate that into an amount of glazing per floor area, that would be roughly 5 square feet for every square foot of glazing. if you extrapolate that to a townhouse and a detached house, that would mean in a townhouse you could only have 35% glazing on its end walls, and on a conventional sort of single-family house, 14%. So this is really by way of just trying to put in context this idea that glazing, fairly extensive glazing in tall buildings, isn't necessarily an unsustainable idea relative to other forms of living. The other are balconies, and those of you that know our work know that I'm very fond of wraparound balconies for a number of reasons. One is that it provides a greater amenity to the unit, particularly in passive solar shading. And it also provides a kind of a physical and visual amenity to these units, and it visually kind of extends the space of the unit, as well as offers an area during clement months of the year to get outside. I had the unusual experience yesterday. I was on my balcony and watching unfold in real time the shooting on Peter Street with people running and screaming, which is really quite horrific. But so what is interesting about, and this also raises, and this has been raised on other panels, other projects that we brought forward on the panel, is this notion of thermally breaking these balconies and whether it is a good, sustainable idea to have balconies at all. And what's very interesting about it is, and this is a chart that, and Craig can speak to it in more detail in the question period, but portion of this presentation. But the interesting thing about balconies is, and heating and cooling, is that these high-rise buildings tend to be heated by natural gas, which is a far more efficient energy source than electricity, and they tend to be air conditioned by electricity. And for those of you who are familiar with the Portland's energy generating station, which supplies at least 25% of the power in downtown Toronto, uses natural gas. So we have this curious thing of natural gas producing electricity. So anything I think that we can do to reduce electricity usage, particularly on the air conditioning side, is a good thing. And certainly balconies will help that. So when you analyze this from a heating and a cooling cost perspective, which I work for market developers, and this is market housing, and so absolutely the cost of putting in these systems and what their payback is a very, very important consideration. And I appreciate some may say, well, cost shouldn't be a factor in sustainability, but in the reality of this, I would submit that it should be. The payback on thermally broken balconies, it saves about $55 a year, and the payback is about 210 years. So it is, I think, a very sustainable way to do this, and I'll just end it at that point and open it up to questions and I guess comments. And as I said, Craig is here to further elaborate on the sustainability side, and Chris on any heritage questions and comments you have.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, Peter. So we're going to move to questions, and since we have three guests and we're always polite, I would like to ask our three panel members if they wish to ask any questions, and we'll start off. What I'm going to do procedurally, I have a list. I'll just go down the list. If you have questions, great. If you don't, then I'll read the next name and we'll go through the list like that.
I have several questions. One, from a process point of view, there's been a lot of emphasis in the presentation on public realm and the lower portions of the project. But is the intent as an SPA application also to review the tower design?
So we put the questions to you that staff are interested in.
Now, in other words, Carl, we're really confining our comments to those areas that have been shared by Urban Design.
Okay. Two other quick questions then, and sorry to belabor the tower thing. I'd like to understand, relative to the 2016 application, did the towers on Block 4 move in location, or are they they in the same location as they were before?
They are in the same location as they were previously, which was largely determined by the precinct plan, whether you put 2 to the north and 1 to the south, or 2 to the south and 1 to the north. Though the precinct plan created, if I'm not mistaken, the potential for having 3 towers on that block. So that seemed to be, in our view, the way best to deploy the locations of those towers, given the requirement for height transition to the east and down to the south to the park.
Okay, so, and sorry, one last question. The ramp, the vehicle ramp that is accessed through the Heritage Muse, could you just describe the use? Like it's trucks, it's cars. If it's cars, how many cars are going in and out of that ramp?
That is accessing, is parking for the entire block. And so there are, I can't recall, Jude is on the phone. He may know how many cars are down there. I can't on the top of my head recall how many are down there, but it's 4 levels of parking. So it's not intended for trucks, it's more passenger cars.
Okay, Carl?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, let me go back to Michael. I see him there now. Can you hear me, Michael?
Question I had, just following on the sustainability discussion, just wondering, in terms of the Toronto Green Standards, has the project been analyzed to see where it fits with the Toronto Green Standards, whether or not there's full belief that some of the things that are being required are the right things to be focused on? And that's what I understand that the point you're making, Peter, just in terms of energy use intensity, TEDI, and greenhouse gas intensity.
Craig, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. The project has submitted for Toronto Green Standard version 3, so it's been reviewed by staff as part of the site plan approval process. This particular project, in terms of the energy metrics that you're mentioning, they fell into the period where we did not need to meet the absolute targets. We could go the relative path. So that was the compliance path chosen for this project. At the same time, we did calculate out what those metrics are. So interestingly, in terms of comparing them to the new requirements, the energy falls a little short, but our TEDI, so our thermal energy demand intensity, is actually about 10 points better than what the minimum requirement is. So that indicates that there's been some focus put on the building envelope to ensure that our TEDI is meeting the new requirements. The energy, we admittedly fall a little short, and that's in one of the slides there that we're showing. We're about 200 where the new requirement is 170.
Can you give us the TEDI number, please?
TEDI number is 60.5. As we calculated out. That was for one of the towers. That was for block B in the north podium, but that's indicative of the other ones.
Okay, Michael?
Question, yes?
Yeah.
In terms of the planning of the south block and the location of the elevator core, and the relationship to the loading dock, and the implicit intent in the overall master plan to have a north-south connection, possibly through that retail block. Was there any consideration made of moving all of the planning of the elevator core to the west side of the lobby rather than the east side, so that the possible future connection north implied in the master plan is something that could still be accommodated? Do you know the area that I'm referring to?
Well, just generally, we're not planning for the future potential of a north-south connection. That you're talking about from Harbor to the east-west heritage, so-called heritage muse. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I don't think we hadn't planned for that. The concern, I think the principal development concern there is the bifurcation of the ground floor in terms of that muse connection that connection and what that might mean in terms of flexibility on the retail. I'm simply telling you what our client's perspective is on that. And it would, if we were to do that, just assume for a moment we were to do that, it would also further complicate, I think, particularly the path connections and the school on the upper floors. And so that really what I'd be concerned you'd result in is a tunnel, not a kind of open to the sky connection. Because you really couldn't, I don't think, accommodate a school on this site by bifurcating that podium into two sections. So it's not really the position of the tower that's determining that. I think it's more about the uses in the podium. Putting a school in here is a very, very, as you can appreciate, is a very complicated thing. It's an interesting thing, I think, typologically and socially, to actually embed a school into a very high density residential neighborhood, or a project rather. But I think that's the principal concern, of what it does to the flexibility and the uses within the podium.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael, let's go. Heather, are you there?
Yep, I am. I think,
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you have any questions you'd like to pose?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'm just going to fire off my 4 questions.
Okay.
So the first one is just, I'd appreciate a bit of a description on daycare pickup and drop off, whether or not that's anticipated to be happening at the street or below grade. Number 2, I understand where the affordable housing is located, and I note on the plans that it looks like each suite is afforded 2 openings within that heritage facade. So I just would like a nod that I'm interpreting that correctly. And the third question is just kind of a technical question for Peter. On the massing diagram in our package, it was on page 59. I'm not sure if that's still the same page number. It's where you talk about the towers going down in height towards the east. I'm just wondering if all the towers are actually shown in that view. And then the fourth question is, I think, mostly to the city. The city-owned park, I'm just wondering the status of that, if there's a designer that's been chosen, and if it's guaranteed to be delivered, to match the end of construction, or prior to the end of construction of Block 4.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Peter, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, if I can remember them all. So the daycare,
I've got them. The first one's the daycare pickup and drop off, at grade, below grade, where?
Blair, are you on the line? Blair Robinson? No?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Can you just speak to the daycare drop off?
Yeah, so there's both drop off access from grade, and there's also at the P1 level, there's actually at the P1 level, there's elevator access provided directly to the daycare. And so you could feasibly drive there and access the elevator and go directly up, as well as access from grade.
Okay, so it's in both.
Yes.
Okay, next question about affordable.
Well, sorry, also the path connection provides access as well. So.
Okay. Okay, Peter, next one about the location of the affordable housing.
Yeah, the theory being that a lot of the users of that daycare will live in this immediate vicinity. On the affordable housing, yes, we're having 2 windows per unit. So these, where it's a 1-bedroom unit, and of course where it's 2, there would be more windows. So we're having to work with, the stricture of that facade. We can't change it at all. I think the third one was, you're asking about the towers. Yes, all the towers were shown.
Yeah, are all the towers shown in that one?
Yes, you don't see the southern tower of the block because it's hidden by the northern tower here.
And you don't see the second Argyle-ish tower either, because it's also hidden. Yeah.
No,
okay.
That's right.
Well, there you go. Okay, and then the fourth question is about the city park. The designer chosen, what's the status of that?
Sorry, it's not our cadre with the city. So right now, as far as I understand,
Parks is in the process of acquiring all the lands, and the latest date that we'll have the full park is by 2028. The actual procurement process for the park has not yet started, but as Caroline mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are working with the TDSB to come up with some potential share solutions to then begin thinking about how the design of this park can evolve over time.
Okay, is that all right, Heather? Okay, let's go to the panel members, and I'll just read your name off. If you have any questions, please go ahead. They'll start off with Betsy.
No questions.
Okay, George is not there, I believe. Claude?
Yes, one question about the Heritage Muse. What did determine the width of it?
The width is essentially determined by the existing facing condition between the warehouse and the south face of the office structure.
Is that, I understand that the whole building's going to be demolished and rebuilt, correctly? Because
No,
you're going to have underground parking, like they did at the one at Bathurst and Lakeshore, and it's all brought back.
That's not correct. So what we are proposing to do is maintain the west, north, and east facades of the office building.
West, north, east, yes.
Right. So they'll remain in situ, as well as probably, and Chris Boygel can talk about this maybe more fulsomely, as well as the first structural bay of that building. The idea is to maintain in situ the east and west walls, and to potentially disassemble and reconstruct, although it's still to be determined, the north wall of the warehouse.
So the central two walls of that new street are a decision that you have made to where the walls will come back in, or maybe, right?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. I mean, what the city is requesting is that the warehouse building remain in absolutely its current existing location, as well as the office building.
Okay.
Where the city is offering flexibilities on the southern facade of that office building.
Okay. Also, I'm having trouble understanding. I don't know if it's misleading, but I'm trying to understand how does the rendering, the beautiful rendering of that, shows sunlight, quite extensive sunlight in many of them. Explain to me how the sun will penetrate that new street. There's a few.
So this is a view. This would be looking west. So this would be sort of afternoon sun around 3 o'clock coming in underneath the western tower, where the 4 o'clock where the sun is lower.
Taking into account the neighbors and the
Yes, because most of the Pinnacle development is aligned in the same southerly, north-southerly conditions as these, so that sun would be coming in from the northwest in the afternoon.
And Peter, I assume that's the June 21st?
I can't tell you exactly the time, but I mean, we can do, certainly we can do sun shade analysis and show you that in a more sort of descriptive and detailed way. But yeah, you would get sun. I mean, this is you get a lot of sun in the northwest sky in the summer, right?
Hello, can you hear me?
Patty, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Any questions?
Yes, I have a quick question. What is the width of the sidewalk street on Freeland near the school? And how many students are anticipated to be attending the school? I'm sorry if I missed that in the presentation. Or how big is the school being designed to accommodate how many students approximately?
Blair, do you want to give those precise measurements of the sidewalk?
Yeah, for the school area is approximately 50,000 square feet for the school, and then
the pedestrian clearway is, I think, 3.07 meters.
3 meters, 3.7. And how do we know how many students are anticipated? Or is this an element? Is it too early? Is it an elementary school?
It's an elementary school. Sorry, it's Jude from Mencas. It's an elementary school, and we understand from the school board that it's about 400 pupils.
400, okay. And just one last very quick question. Was there ever an anticipation to get a connection or entry frontage of the school down to the corner of Harvard and Freeland, or was it always delegated to the east side of the development? Sorry, west side.
Okay, I can answer that question again. It's Jude Tersini from Mencas. So it's a very precarious little position that LCBO has actually put forward. They actually have a restriction on school uses altogether in this quadrant because of the social responsibility aspect of their product and young children. So the only place that LCBO is willing to entertain a school facility is on Friedland Street, with its primary frontage not facing its exposure, because they are concerned that their marketing could somehow be viewed by the students from the school entrance, and at that point would be a negative point.
Even for elementary school students, that's interesting. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
We thought it was interesting as well, but
elementary school.
Okay, train them early.
All right, thank
Okay,
you.
Fatty, other questions?
Good, thank you.
Okay. I don't know, Bridget, are you there now?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, we can hardly hear you.
Okay. So I had a question related to the alignment of the west end of the Heritage Muse with the Pinnacle development to the west. There'll be a lot of people walking down Yonge Street and crossing over through the Pinnacle and then along the Heritage Muse. But it didn't seem like they were aligned in terms of the curb cuts or entry to the street. And it was just a question about the relationship between one block and the other.
Blair, do you know the precise alignment on the Pinnacle development?
Yeah, so the path connection, the mid-block connection of the path connection is a little further north of where the Muse is.
I guess I was wondering about the at-grade. I was thinking about the at-grade connection as opposed to the path.
Right.
Oh, yeah, it's here. It's a little bit further north as far as the at-grade.
So really,
I mean, the issue is
we have to deal with, obviously, is those heritage buildings, and that kind of determines the aperture from Freeland.
Right. I guess, okay. And then the other question is just the issue of this Heritage Muse. The path is on the second floor, and the kind of public realm is on the sidewalk, and the streets are on the ground floor. So is there, other than the escalators, which happen at the very south end of Block 4, there's no other connection other than I mean, the public isn't really allowed into the elevators. So really the kind of this new public realm of the path remains very disconnected from the Heritage Muse at the street.
there's actually a connection at grade from the Muse that you can get into the elevator and access the path.
Can you show me where that is with your cursor?
I think Peter's highlighting that now, possibly, or sorry, someone else.
That's me. So right here, Bridget, there's an elevator.
Is it on the south side near the ramp?
Yes, by the daycare, and then it takes you up to the path connection here.
And does that, okay, and then my last question is that the retail that you have is really large. Could that potentially be a grocery store?
Jude, do you want to speak to that?
We're obviously looking at different formats as of late, because obviously the retail landscape is changing kind of day by day. We were obviously trying to maintain maximum flexibility for potential retail tenants, but I can tell you that it would likely not be a food store, because we're trying to seek a food store on Block 1 right now. So I can't necessarily elaborate on what type of retail this could be, because it's actually quite far along in terms of the retail cycle. But we've basically offered the opportunity for flexibility in leasing, and given the retail landscape that we're currently experiencing, the utmost flexibility is important because we don't know what can be achieved, at a later juncture.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Bridget.
Yep.
All right, Nina Marie.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I only had a question about total number of people in the towers, and I think that was answered earlier, so I'm fine.
Yeah, that's roughly 3,000 units, Peter, I believe.
Yes,
give or
roughly.
take.
Roughly.
Okay, thanks. Eric, please.
A couple of questions. One is the south tower. How does the pickup drop off happen there? Because I don't see any connection from the Muse.
Excuse me. So the drop off for the south tower would be off Harbor Street, and it has a sort of back of house connection to loading off the Heritage Muse here. But the principal access in terms of visitors coming would be on Harbor Street.
Okay. And on the one question I have on Cooper Street, the path connection. Why is it? I mean, I could see there's an escalator, some stairs. I mean, why is it taking the entire frontage of that area? Was there some study or analysis to see if it can be, some of the street frontage could be more animated? Because ultimately it's just a corridor.
I think that's an interesting observation. I mean, right now what we have is a stacked escalator system. So you're coming down from the second floor to ground, and then you go loop back and then go down into the P1 level. But certainly it's possible, just looking at the plan here, that retail might be able to fold around that to the north end.
Mm-hmm. And another question is could you just maybe on that diagram, just show me when you go to school, how do you access, where's the main door? Or do you have to go through the colonnade and that's at the end of the colonnade, or can you come from Freeland directly? I'm just trying to understand how that's, you
can come through any of these apertures, these proposed apertures in the wall. So this is the front door of the school.
Okay. So the front door is from under that colonnade.
That's correct.
Okay.
Again, we're dealing with the sensitivity of the facade and how the extent of interventions that we can make in it.
Okay.
And yes, well, I guess just to build on Claude's question, was there any shadow study that was done to understand how much light does that Muse get?
Yes, we have shadow studies. Unfortunately, I don't have them with me today, but we have prepared shadow studies. And we could certainly submit those as a kind of a secondary submission or an appendix or something. If that's helpful.
No more questions.
I mean, it's suffice to say, it's a difficult condition, right?
Yes.
There's no two ways about it. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it.
Yeah. Okay, let's go. Jana, please, are you there?
Thanks, Peter. I just have one question. That's if you could give just a high-level summary of the restrictions with respect to the heritage facade and what you're allowed and not allowed to do.
Essentially, strictly speaking, what Heritage Toronto would prefer is that we maintain all of the facades exactly in their location and exactly in their current configuration with no interventions. So anything beyond that is a negotiation. And so they haven't actually settled and agreed whether these sorts of proposed interventions on the west side and the east side will be approved. We had a similar experience of this in some work we did at Distillery, where there are various rack houses that we both kept some facades in situ and others we reconstructed with reused material. And then we cut a lot of those openings down to grade. And that's what we're hoping to be able to achieve here, but it's by no means assured. So if you and others feel we're going too far or not far enough, now's the time to offer us that commentary.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Maybe you can offer some comments on that later. I have Pat, Jeff, and Kevin remaining for questions. Pat, any questions?
No questions for me.
Okay, Jeff? Are you there, Jeff?
Hey, Paul. Sorry. Just looking for maybe a bit of clarity on the mechanical system for the residential units and sort of the ventilation strategy and what's being done in suite.
So Blair, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, we'd be using ERVs within the suites is typically what's being done now, and you're providing makeup air to the floor, and then using the ERVs to cycle through. I don't know, Craig, if you want to speak to that at all.
No, nothing else to add. Just trying to minimize the air in the corridor and bring in most of the fresh air on ERVs in the suites. You can talk about the other mechanical systems that we've assumed at this point that it's a fan coil system that's distributing hot and chilled water, and I think as Peter mentioned, the Menkes is looking at considering an N-Wave district energy system.
Okay, Kevin, please. Any questions from your perspective?
Yes, thanks. I'm just wondering, maybe this is a question for Mr. McIntyre. Do we have the greenhouse gas intensity metric for the project available?
Yeah, we do. It's on the indicative report, it's 23.5.
Thanks for that. That actually closely approaches the Tier 1 requirements. Can you tell me just very roughly, maybe you might have it on hand, the percentage of energy intensity that the high-rise elevators would take for these projects? Would you have that available?
I don't have that. I don't have that broken out. I would have to check whether we had considered that itemized separately or whether that was in a typical floor plug load.
If you have any opportunity to, maybe you can, that would be of interest to me. But other than that, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. Well, it's just a little bit before 11. We're going to move to comments now, and I know Betsy has to leave right or very close to 11. Do you have a comment you want to make before you go, Betsy?
I do. I have a short list. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's always nice to see projects that we've reviewed well in the past come back more fully fleshed out so that we can focus on primarily the public realm and make sure that it really is adequate for this type of density that you've achieved here. The Heritage Muse, the view on Freeland looking east, I think the Muses, I think, are kind of a troublesome spot still in the planning, as we've kind of identified, I think, even last time. Getting past those kind of super kind of massive columns is going to be really tough. And the view down the street is primarily of, it's a muse, but it's really a road with very small sidewalk and ability to get past that big line of columns going that direction. I would suggest that you clearly need the muse to read as more pedestrian and less vehicular, because it's still designed as a sidewalk space and a car space, even though it's a muse, which should really blend it all together. I would see if you can actually give much more space to the sidewalk. So on the north side of the street, you pull that line in so that you can actually walk around the south side of the column that's fronting the north side of the street. I would also suggest you give a lot more pedestrian space onto that south sidewalk by those really large retail spaces, because you're going to have, not a small number of people accessing. Hopefully, you'll have a lot of people accessing that retail space. And I think that by blending them together, potentially making the street wide enough just for a car and then a car to get by it if it happens to be stopping there. So pinching the street pinching the entrance so that only one car can kind of come in at a time will really help the Muse read more pedestrian and less vehicular, which is where it should live. It shouldn't live in the, it looks like a street that's 3 cars wide and has a little sidewalk on each side. So I would see if you can put a lot more attention onto that piece and try to treat those columns in some way. They are very much like a screen that you have to move past to come down the street, and I'm not sure it's going to welcome people to that retail block that you have there. So I'm quite worried about that. About the public realm in general, and I'm going to save, I'm going to let the landscape and sustainability folks talk more about this, but you know, how are people going to use it? You've got 2,900 units, so conservatively put 100 people in your plazas, kind of in each one. That's, you could have way more people than you think using these spaces right outside the front of the building. You can't plan for everything, but certainly we are all more aware of public space now than we were 3 months ago. There's a sensibility that sidewalks in the city are not big enough. Public spaces are inadequate for the number of residents in downtown Toronto, and there's an absence of meaningful cycling infrastructure. I didn't really hear in your presentation about any of these things, and I think that really needs to translate into how you visualize the public realm, both for yourselves so you can really see how it's going to work, and for people that you're showing this project to going down the line. Regarding sustainability, I love the argument that you put forward about the glazing numbers relative to single family homes, because you've kind of opened the door now so we can extend the analogy to other metrics. So relative to EUI, in our office, we do a lot of single family homes, and our single family homes are being designed with EUIs of 50 or less. By extension, your efficiency argument could extend then to things like EUI numbers. Given the envelope to space ratio, you should be able to well beat a 50 EUI. I don't care how you do it, whether it's glazing, balconies, or 1,000 other things, but I think that effort in that realm would be kind of where the world has gone. Anywhere, if you've got too high an EUI at this point, you're just kind of ignoring the fact that this is a major issue. And then my last point would be that I just want to go on record with the city, because it seems like the city is kind of part and parcel of the discussion with bridges across streets in the downtown, that I am against building any more bridges between buildings in the downtown. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Betsy. I'll move now to our guests from the city panel. Michael, are you still there?
Yes, I am. I'm here.
You have comments, please?
Thank you. Yes, a few comments. Firstly, yes, thanks for the excellent presentation. And I think in a project like this, the super metropolitan scale that this project represents, I guess the only equivalent that we know of is at Bloor and Yonge, with towers and public realm, except with the difference being here that there's a greater master plan with public space to the south. So just trying to put it in context of the scale of these towers and the scale of the public realm. In that spirit, thinking about the landscape treatment, and I have to differ a little bit with Betsy on this one, whereas I at first was quite concerned about the Muse. I have to admit that when I think about the proportions, the Gothic proportions of the column spaces, the height, the 26-meter height, exceeding the highest point of the Gardiner Expressway, which I think is 18. There's something powerfully representative of this development, and I think that the character that is emerging for the Muse and the materiality, I think, is in concert with this super metropolitan scale. And I would say that by comparison, the landscape character on the edges seems, I would say, maybe more domestic. And I know that it's in keeping with what the Waterfront Toronto guidelines are, but it seems to me that it could progress further to represent the truly immense significance of the project and of the density associated with it. And then I definitely agree that the public space allocation, while is good, may not yet recognize what is needed in the future. On the subject of sustainability, I echo Betsy's comments. Despite the fact that the application timing allows it to necessarily skirt some of the requirements, there are opportunities in this project, certainly at the height and density that's being proposed, to go beyond the current payback periods. In particular, while I'm persuaded by the solar shading argument and the payback time currently, we know that things can change rapidly. I was curious about the same argument not being applied to the school facade, the south facade, and why there might not be an opportunity there to look differently at the institutional occupancy and its EUI and glass edges, and why there might not be an opportunity for solar control. Considering the density, the clearing of the ground floor from servicing, that's truck parking entrance and so on, I think is masterful. And the team has done a beautiful job making it feel as though with all these people and all those vehicles that it's a light touch in terms of the servicing. And finally, I believe that the interventions that are being proposed are in keeping with the character of the development, the needs of the social spaces, and obviously they need more work, but I think that the interventions are going in the right direction. That's it for me. Thank you, Paul.
Michael. Carl, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Thanks. And thanks for the presentation. It's a very ambitious project with many complex and competing needs. Just like to point out a few things that I think are particularly laudable in this project. Certainly the mix of uses, which goes back to the planning of the overall site, is good, but the introduction of the school particularly, I think, is terrific. The animation of the street edges, subject to Eric's comment about that, the west side of the retail on the ground floor, I think the animation is good. I'm in support of the strategy with regards to the heritage retention and the new openings along the west and east facades and how they integrate into the new south facade. I think the south facade of the podium and its framing of the park to the south is very powerful. I'm also pleased to see that through the lobbies of the two north towers and the heritage building, that there is a mix of people from the affordable housing and the market housing. I think that's very praiseworthy. What my concerns have to do with the heritage views. I think the Muse, the mid-block connection is very important and generally needed. However, I think the architectural treatment of it, as has been mentioned, the large columns, the elevator cores of the two towers diminish the quality and character of the heritage facades. And no question, heroic moves have been made to raise the towers up and above that space to bring daylight into the space. But I find the columns and elevator cores much too distracting from the heritage facades, and have wondered if a simpler solution that actually encloses a portion of that mid-block connection with some simple glass walls would tend to feature the heritage facades and diminish the impact of the new tower cores. And I think my last comment is I do take exception to the fact that we're not talking about the architecture of the towers. 300-meter towers are significant in the city, and any building of that height will be experienced from great distances. And I think we have an obligation to make sure that the architecture of tall buildings is exceptional. I know the architect is capable of it, but I think the joint committee should have an opportunity to review the architectural solutions for that. Those are my comments.
Okay, thanks very much, Carl. Heather, are you there?
Yep, thank you. Like those before me, I just want to say that I appreciate the clarity of the package. It's a very, very complex project, and all of the graphics were very simple and clear. I also really appreciate, the spirit of the project, trying to deliver a mixed-use community with a bit of everything. So I think also Michael and Carl have said that's a very tall order, and I think that the general planning and disposition of all of the program has been handled very masterfully. With respect to the heritage and the openings within that, I do think that the degree and location of new openings that are being suggested seems very good, actually. So I think there's a good tuning and balance that's been achieved with respect to respecting the very opaque heritage facade, and then adding key openings at very explicit junctures that really kind of bolster the interior planning. With respect to the landscape, I'm not a landscape architect, but I do appreciate, Sibylla, the idea of monoculture, and I think that in itself is quite a bold move. So I appreciate that idea, and also the kind of optimistic attitude about the heritage muse. I mean, I hope that you are right about sunlight coming in there, and that we can have a kind of green moment. So I think that's great thinking. I also like the careful attention to the paver choices. With respect to the architecture, I agree with Carl about talking about the tower architecture, but I also appreciate that there's a lot going on in this project, and the panel has asked us to focus on the lower portions, and therefore the package has a focus on that as well. So I also agree with Michael that these kind of Gothic proportions for the heritage muse, there's something actually quite nice about it. And I actually wonder if there could be more playfulness with respect to the way these towers land on the heritage buildings. And I think there's some hints of that in the project now. In the kind of striated and angled 1- and 2-story portions that start to negotiate the very complicated way that the heritage and the program on top meet very simple towers coming from above. There's one moment I note in the heritage muse where there's a kind of colored curtain, I think, coming down, and I just wonder if there could be more moments like that, or if there could be a way to have the columns engage in a bit more of a playful way, whether there's additional elements added to kind of make them seem less utilitarian. I also think that the daycare and the school programs being added to the project and being made visible on the south, together with their outdoor play areas, is a programmatic opportunity that could bolster this idea of having a few more playful or colorful moments within the building space. And I think I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I'll go back to the panel then. Claude, you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah, okay.
I think Nina Marie may have to leave, so I may just give her if she wants to start, and then I could do it after, because right, and I could come right after. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I just tried to make this very efficient, careful presentation on a complex project as well. I really am in agreement with Betsy's comments with respect to the muse. I think that my other landscape colleagues will have more to say on this. In particular, I'm concerned about the prioritization of, for an area that is meant to look like a Wohnnerf, it's not there yet, I think. Really some attention to the priority of pedestrianism would really help. I don't think this is achieved by bridges ever. So I come out in, it's clear that I think that I'm not supportive of the bridges. Again, I'm being rather blunt because I'm trying to be quick. So understand that these comments are made with respect for a lot of the complexity that has gone in. I'm trying to focus specifically on the public realm for the moment. But I'd also say that just like architecture deserves our attention for a building of this project of this density, so too does the importance of the public realm. And I think I need to be on record in my role on this panel to say that never before have we understood the value of the public realm and the landscape as we do at this moment. Notwithstanding that this project has been in development for a long time, I think there's an opportunity here to show, at a minimum, to show currency, and if not leadership. And so really there is a moment for us to see that public realm will be as critical as any other kind of investment in infrastructure. In fact, it is a vital prescription for public health. And to that end, I really encourage this development team, and in particular the Respect for Landscape, to really maximize wherever possible the opportunity for pedestrians to gather at grade in the most innovative way possible. And that means really prioritizing this. So these are less specific and more general comments that I know others will be able to elaborate on in the next few minutes. But I'd say with close to 3,000 units at this density, room for gathering at grade and being outside in a way that is conducive to mental and physical health is essential. So please, if there's any opportunity there, this begins with prioritizing the pedestrian over the car, with active transportation, whether it's bicycles or scooters. These are all now seen as critical aspects of infrastructure. I leave it there and I say thank you very much for the presentation. I hope that others will build on these with more comments.
Okay, thanks, Nina Marie. Go back to Claude.
Yes, thank you. Peter, you're the master of amazing problem solver, right? This is, I think that's, you do that very well. I support the overall strategy and spirit and the heritage, but I have a huge but. And I think it will be, and I think I will address mainly on the public realm. I think we would need to put your head towards putting it a little bit on the treadmills for dimension, as what Nina Marie was saying, in a sense of creating spaces. I think some trimming is needed. This is a huge project. There will be a lot of people here and around. I understand the heritage issue, but I think it needs adjustment to fit today's reality by the fact that we're going to rebuild it entirely. I think the dimensional stuff is not there yet. I think there's not enough room in places. I support the idea of having this park on the south. It's great. But I think within the block number 4, I have doubt about the light coming in as we see. I think it may be like, right, I'd like to see some light study with all the kind of contextual development around. I think the public realm plan is too minimum. I think we and you would need to see it in a kind of a bigger context to understand it. I think to be a little bit more comprehensive, the plan is not showing all the dimension that would help us to understand it. It's here and there, and it worries me. The cross section is misleading and incomplete and too minimum. We don't see infrastructure below ground, which is a big reality of if you want to get trees going. We have to know that now. I think the feasibility of soil volume is important. I'd like to see what's the new curb, what's the new street, and this is a great opportunity to manage infrastructure placement to help the greening if we want to do that, right? And I think that would be, I'd like to see that. I think we would need 5 cross-section complete. I find that the dimension and the width of sidewalks on Lakeshore is way too small. How many thousands of people are we gonna have here? The sidewalk width is the same width of my sidewalk in Rosemont, where we have 3-story of 2.1 meters. It's not sufficient. I am very concerned about that, and especially with the reality that we have now. So I think the overall programming and all this is great. It seems that the building is just a little bit too much. The dimension of the muse, I agree with Betsy. There's a kind of not, if you want to do it a pedestrian for driven, let's feel it. It seems it's not working. The car, the trucks, the safety, I'm concerned about it. The south facade with the glass is great, but 1.4 meters, it's not sufficient, right? I think it's a safety issue. I understand the columns that you have. I think it's a great moment. Can we make this laneway a little bit more generous and having more air, more room for this? The dog zone, I will not comment on it. What about the pavers group also on the west side? We just finished a sidewalk at the Daniels City of the Art. We did all the public realm in granite. We were obliged to demolish it to go back with the city standard paver. So, right? So I think you should, I think with Sibyl, you should be very, very careful about doing drawings that may not be getting there to send the wrong message, right? So that's what I'm concerned about. And I think the density that you have here is so big that some of it needs to go back on proper width. I think the public art that we seen here, it's I think let's not get there. When I look at the size of the building and I look at it next to it, it seems they're not talking to each other. And I kind of like the scale of what you're doing within this muse. So how can we celebrate it in a much better way instead of a token next to it? So, right, look at the size of the unit that you have, and you understand what happened at Bellwood Park last weekend, right? People want space outside. We need room outside lobbies, a little bit more room. We need a little bit more fluidities on the sidewalk, but your overall strategy of the building is great. I think the building needs to be trimmed a little bit. I'm not concerned about height. I'm just concerned about the kind of the volume it takes on the entire blocks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claude. Peter. Are you still there, Peter?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
Okay.
waking up now. It's like 8:30 in the morning, so
Yeah, I know.
good. So I have a number of comments. First of all, Peter, this is an incredibly complex project, and I get it. And you've done actually an exceptional job in organizing it and getting the various kind of street level issues related to the public realm and so on in the right place. And some projects somewhere near this density, and it's complicated. And you've done a great job, and the heritage things have complicated it. I've got a series of small issues and then one or two major issues. First of all, the south face of the new glazed, I believe it's facing harbor. You've got vertical shading elements; those should be put on. Not vertical in it. South I'm concerned about the muse. I believe that the illustration that shows sunlight on the muse is either extremely selective or false. I don't think there's any glazing on any sunshine and public realm, and I doubt that landscape will survive on the public muse, and I support that's in Claude's comments on that. I'm also concerned about the public realm and the amount of sidewalk space. And again, if somebody said, you know, give me more sidewalk space in exchange for height, I would say take it and let the height go up, given what's going on. And I guess finally, my main concern is around energy. Of course, Peter, you know this. I think it's time to abandon your defense of slab. You know, most of the progressive architecture in the country are embracing thermal separation in various forms, and I think your statistics around the cost advantages of not doing thermal separation are false, and I deal with this on a daily basis, and I think it's time to change your attitude. We all projecting balconies, particularly in eastern and colder climates, should be thermally separated from the main structure. It's about human comfort, not about cost. It's about the appropriate thing to do in terms of carbon consumption, and it's time to move on. And I'm sorry that there weren't EUI information around that. What you're proposing would be illegal in Vancouver, and we have a much more benign climate. So I think it's time to wake up and take a better approach to projecting balconies. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Bridget, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. First of all, I appreciated the presentation. I also felt that the issue of future flexibility as addressed in the shear walls was really important. And I feel that this is really an important step for all high-rise buildings. Is there an echo?
No, I think you're okay.
Okay. First of all, I think that the east-west mid-block connection in the Heritage Muse is a really important part of an emerging public realm. So what we have is the Yonge Street north-south connection. At our last meeting, we saw a park at the southeast corner of Yonge and Lakeshore. And what I understand is that you come underneath the building across and you would connect to this Heritage Muse at grade. And I feel it's really important that the public realm address the relationship between one block and another. And right now it looks like they're misaligned, and the issue of paving, crosswalks, alignment to ensure the continuity of the public realm is really important. And when you think of the size and number of people in both the Pinnacle block and this block 4, it's kind of on between, there needs to be coordination between the two projects. And I understand the heritage issues that you have in block 4. So the issue of alignment really has to come from a city perspective to ensure the continuity of the at-grade public realm. I think that the path is also an emerging public system. We've seen it in the kind of block further closer to Bay Street. And it's really important for me, from my perspective, that there is a connection between the Heritage Muse and the second floor emerging public realm. So even though you've shown a stair and an elevator, they are really puny, and that they don't really make a public link between one and the other. And right now the path system is quite circuitous. So right now the fact that it kind of almost avoids the Muse, I feel like what you're showing on the screen of some kind of public connection needs to be stronger and much more public. Right now your columns are massive along the Heritage Muse, but I think that it's an opportunity So already we've seen examples by West 8 of the kind of piers along the lake shore and creative ways to make that a kind of opportunity. We've also seen projects in the Riverside area where the underside of the residential tower is seen as a kind of elevation of the building, and again, an opportunity as a reflective surface. Here you have this one that's quite huge and tall, and I just think it needs to be engaged as part of the public realm, and not just the underside of a huge tower up above. And then in a way, my final comment is that one of the strengths of Waterfront Toronto is the way that they have always led by landscape. And so the park itself, which is a really important component of this neighborhood, especially when you think of the development to the west and to the east of the park, it can't really lag behind. And that in a way, the strength of so many of the Waterfront Toronto projects is that the parks were actually in place before the development. So for me, it would be very sad if the park came a long time after all of this development, that there needs to be an emphasis on the kind of relationship of the timing of the public realm relative to the residential construction. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I also really appreciate the complexity of this project and the programs. I think one of the previous panel members mentioned the kind of metropolitan scale of this project, and I think this is something really important to keep in mind. I too appreciate the complexity of the programs and the uses that are being put into these blocks into this block, as well as all the kind of heritage elements that have to go in, especially in a vertical community like this. It's becoming very important for us to rethink the kind of mixes of uses. So I really want to commend the team on really taking this on very seriously. I'm also learning after being cooped up for 9 weeks in a very nicely designed Peter Cluis condo how much I appreciate being outdoors as well. So given the kind of prominence of the location of the project, both along the waterfront, but also near the foot of Yonge Street, I think it's really important to radically rethink and reconsider the entire ground plane as a continuous porous programmed surface for pedestrian circulation and gathering first and foremost. So this will probably require, some leadership from the city as well in how we think and reconsider right-of-ways, especially in these very prominent metropolitan scale type projects and locations. So I would imagine that the city would also have to kind of give back and allow for some more flexibility and innovation when it comes to the design of roads in this area. I also agree with Bridget that the park should really come first and be a nucleus and an attractor to really help define what we mean by the value of the public realm, especially at the near the foot of Yonge Street and along the waterfront. So I'm imagining, this idea potentially that Harbor Street and to some extent, what was it, the north-south street just to the west, where the school is, to be imagined as real Woonarfs, expanding the sidewalks out and expanding the paving pattern in a way that would actually make cars feel a little less welcome around this area, all the while making it safer and easier for the 400 elementary school students who will cross and play in this park inadvertently at some point and still see the LCBO from there. So I think this is a pretty funny reasoning to push the entrance to the other side, but that's neither here or there. But if we seriously narrow Harbor and Freeland streets and turn them into true Woonarfs, we could definitely begin to stitch together some elements of the public realm in a way that doesn't take away from the footprints of the buildings, but also make the pitch for more flexible and innovative ground level uses. I want to make a quick pitch too to maybe imagine more restaurants along the north side of the park, south side of the buildings, with large patios that might spill out. I know that there's a kind of lack of these, sunny, large restaurant spaces on the central waterfront. So this could be something obviously that is pretty seasonal, but all I'm urging for is a really serious, innovative, flexible imagination of the perimeter of many of these building blocks to allow for the public realm to really be the centerpiece of the ground plane in this project. These are my main comments. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fadi. Eric.
Yes, hi. Well, this is, thank you for a great presentation. I think it's this, I was mentioned, this is a very big puzzle, trying to put all the pieces together in a very coherent way. And I think there's a lot of good things that are, you know, that are emerging here. The mix of use, integrating daycare, the school, affordable housing, high density. I think there is a, you know, these are the kind of projects we want to be as mixed as possible and work well together. So I'll build on some of the comment that was from my colleagues, which I agree on the previous comment. We'll first talk. I want to talk about the muse. I think that the east-west muse. I think there's a couple of things. I think there is, you know, it's supposed to be a heritage muse. I think there's a question of the scale here that is needs to be continued to explore. I think there's the height. I think the structural quality of that, of how the building meets the ground, about the column, how it comes together, how as Brigitte mentioned, the underside of the building, you know, there's some, you know, I almost think, you know, this should be as good as the treatment of the Calatrava connection that happens in a BC place. It should be something that is quite unique, quite special. It's something that I think needs to be continued to explore and elaborated. There's actually not a lot of animation on the street, on that muse when you look at it. And there's also a few point of conflict, because you have all the back of the elevator banks, there are some small sidewalk, and then there's some on the north side. There's also those loading type B spaces that crosses very narrow sidewalk. So where there's not a lot of visual point to see how you get to it. Would I encourage if you could consolidate them? I mean, because the underground is all interconnected, is there a possibility to maybe consolidate them into a point? Maybe it's on the south of that lane. Is there a way to actually look to see if there are more places on that on the former office building where these things can where you can actually eliminate some of these conflicts, continue to augment the visual connection between the north and the laneway? So that's something that I would encourage to continue to explore. This is probably something that I think is worth looking at. I think you have some pickup drop off on the residential to the north. Right now, you're suggesting that maybe Harbor is where for the South Tower it's located. I don't know. I mean, instinctively, it seems to me that trying to consolidate them along the Muse might not be such a bad place to think about, just to something to think about. One element that on the Muse too that is it's kind of bothering me is it's the Heritage Bridge. Like I know the area fairly well. To me, that copper bridge is an element that when you come in, it's the first thing you see as part of as when you look down that alley. Seeing it now, like I found that the nature of it has been lost, where it's now tucked behind columns, just over a loading area. You kind of lose the character, you lose its importance, you lose the way that it actually was one of a prime element of readability as part of this thing, of its character. Now, and this might be controversial, but could the bridge be moved on the other side of the column? Is it something, does it have to stay there? Because I'm assuming it may have to be removed and put back, obviously, when the construction happened. Something to think about, because I found that right now it's just not quite working from a heritage. I think it lost its heritage character. On the looking at some of the edge connection. So Cooper Street over time is, it's anticipated that we will be connecting to the north. We'll have a tunnel. It will have some increase pedestrian connectivities and vehicular connectivity. I found that the way the path, taking an entire frontage along Cooper Street, I found that it maybe is, I'm not sure that's the best use of a frontage, which in the future will be, will have a lot more pedestrian circulation. I would say that looking at if there's a way to reduce the footprint of that connection, making it more consolidated, is there a way to also maybe increase the animation along Cooper Street? And maybe there is a few more opening. Maybe there's some strategic opening in some areas so that it responds better to what's happening on the east side of the block, which is planned to have mainly retail. So trying to reinforce that character. The another point that I would like to make, I think from a public realm perspective, I agree with Brigitte. I would like to, one thing that I'm not getting a sense here to is how does the whole precinct from a public realm, from its edges, all comes together with the project to the east, to the west, to the south, all those ground planes get treated. So that is something that being able to see that big picture is, to me, would be quite critical. The facade along, a few people, and I've heard that a few people like the treatment of the facade along Harbor Street. I think there is personally opportunities to have further articulation. There is a school behind, there's different functions, there's different use. I would say one of the things that I found with the waterfront sometimes that is missing is having a finer grain of treatment on facade. This is a very long facade, an entire city block with different use. I found that, something that we generally miss in the waterfront is that the facade can actually be further articulated, different, maybe there's some color, maybe there's this different treatment, something that I think would be needs to continue to be explored. The exit, and that's something obviously that needs to be continued to be explored, the exit of the school, the entrance to the school, with the sheer number of people coming in and out of the kids coming out of the school, I think that, whether we can create a few more opening, enlarge some of the opening. I know this is something that needs to be dealt with the heritage, but I think just from a practical perspective, that might be something to continue to be looked at. As mentioned by Betsy, I am not would not be supportive of a bridge over Harbor Street. I think it's an at-grade crossing, and making it as safe as possible is something that I think is more appropriate than having a pedestrian bridge over Harbor. So I'll leave my comment to that. That generally covers everything else has been covered.
Okay, Eric, thanks. We have Jana, Pat, Jeff, and Kevin. Jana, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Thanks a lot. And in the interest of time, I'll keep my comments brief. I just want to say I, again, appreciate, as my colleague said, all the work and the complexity of this project. It's incredibly challenging and quite masterful in some of the strategies they've employed. And I also agree with my colleagues' comments about the different aspects that have been brought up, particularly about the Muse. I'm just going to reserve my comments to the west side with the daycare and the school, and particularly through the lens that the city actually tasked the panel to view this through, which is an animated accessible and welcoming public realm. I think that, it's one strategy to think about shrink wrapping retail architecturally. It's another when you're dealing with public institutions, particularly schools and daycares, which require a profound reciprocity between indoors and outdoors. I don't think having colored pavement is the proxy for public space or for space that or supports animation of space. I think having a daycare and a school is all you need to respond architecturally, to animate that whole west side in a really interesting way. I think I would argue that this is one place where you should really take liberties with the really buttoned down heritage asset of the building to signal, when we look at this elevation, you don't know there's a school there, you don't know there's a daycare there. I know that, drop-offs, pickups at lunch, at the end of the day, people are going to be huddled outside. I don't feel like it's a really accessible, welcoming, or animated public space yet. I think there's some really interesting opportunities when you walk into the school foyer between where the small, elevator is and the column. It'll be very difficult to get a stroller through there. I think if you use that space where that grand staircase is and use that as the elevator and get rid of the elevator there, you're starting to working with the kind of spaces you need when you're addressing groups of people. So I would say, look at the daycare and the school on all levels, and take it, scrub it through the architectural ideas about crush space, about group play and group movement. Schools and daycares tend to move people in large groups of kids with adults, not in a kind of condominium amenity space of just 2 or 3 people. And finally, I think there's a real opportunity to open up sectionally where the amenity space for the residential is on top of the institutional uses. There's a space to sectionally puncture that relationship to allow more natural light into the floor space of the school and the daycare, or particularly the school. It's a very difficult and deep section north-south, and you're going to be really hamstrung to get the adequate amount of light. I would suggest that you erode the residential storage space with all of the back of house uses that a school needs, so that you can open up the corridor spaces, the play spaces, and the interstitial meeting spaces for the school and the daycare. And I think that would make for a far more successful program. And I would urge you to do it now, because frankly, I don't see how the daycare can become a daycare once you start adding all the requirements for plumbing, separate spaces for sleeping. And I really urge you not to make it someone else's problem, but to take it on now, because I think that will positively inflect on the public space at the ground level. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Jenna. Pat. Pat, are you there? No? Okay, Jeff? Jeff, are you still there? Let's go to Kevin.
Hi, sorry, still here.
Is that Jeff?
Yep, this is Jeff. Thanks very much, buddy. So I'm gonna focus just on the sustainability piece, and I feel like some of this has already been said, but I just want to maybe establish some foundational concepts, and I think it's important that underlying this, the economics are critical, and I think Peter's right, and I'm always empathetic to condo developers because the economics of energy conservation do not lend themselves well to the business model of developing condos. So the payback with today's energy dollars, isn't really maybe the correct number. It's really investment versus resale value, and that's a challenge, and I acknowledge that. We have some challenges around what are the right baselines to set, and looking at window to wall ratio and comparing a high-rise residential property with small unit sizes to single family homes, obviously very different metrics. And there's inherent efficiencies around the floor plan, around reduced envelope. On the other hand, if we're comparing a high-rise tower like this to, say, a mid-rise multi-residential property, 6 stories or less, would have the same envelope ratio, same window-to-wall ratio, but there's a lot of stuff that those smaller buildings don't have that this building does have, pumps, fans, and obviously huge embodied carbon around the structure. And when we're looking at our climate goals about being carbon neutral by 2050 as a country, I think if you look at a 30-year timeline of where all the carbon comes from, I would bet this building would half the carbon that this building emits over the next 30 years will be the construction, maybe more. And so there's a huge deficit that we need to make up in this building typology. And it's very, very challenging with very tall buildings to deliver efficiencies at this scale. I think we need to start looking at how we compensate for those. I think there's some work that could be done to reduce that embodied carbon number. That's where I would focus my efforts. There's certainly more work that can be done on the energy efficiency side. With the envelope, Peter mentioned as well, it's not just about energy savings, it's about thermal comfort, mean radiant temperature, also balancing that with daylighting and views and everything that makes a place livable. But these really small units, if we're not factoring in radiant temperature, there are significant comfort issues and significant usability issues in middle of winter, middle of summer. And then finally, when I talk about the economics, I go back to this goal that we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. City of Toronto has a climate emergency. Transform TO has been upgraded to be carbon neutral before 2050. So when we're talking about the cost to the unit owners who buy these units, it's not just the utility cost. It's the fact that at some point they're going to have to invest in getting this building down to carbon neutral. Now, some of that will be done on the grid side through greening the grid. And so the carbon numbers or the efficiency numbers around electricity, I don't think are quite accurate. I think we need to look at where the grid's going to go. And really, it's going to be much harder for buildings to decarbonize gas systems than electricity systems right now. I know, the gas folks are working on some innovations, but we're still pretty far from that, and we're seeing a real push toward electrification. And so thinking about over 30 years, what is this building going to have to do? What it's going to be pushed to do by regulation to decarbonize, and thinking about what that means for condo fees and investments by that community, I think is significant. And if we're not thinking about what is the zero carbon transition strategy, if the economics aren't there to do it now, it will need to be done. What does that look like? And are we designing flexibility into the building so that that is easier for them to do in future? I think that's something that should be thought of. So I'll end my comment with that.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Is Pat still there? No? Kevin.
Thanks, Paul. I think a lot of my comments or things that I wanted to say have already been communicated by the panels. So thanks for that. A lot of good commentary. My prime mandate is to evaluate submissions vis-a-vis green standard compliance. So maybe this is well, I'll try to be quick. This is perhaps maybe a comment that Mr. McIntyre might find amusing. We sat together on the CGBC tag, and we talked a lot about this. I'm not a fan of relative energy simulation compliance. We talked ad nauseum about that on the committee. But nonetheless, the numbers that have been submitted, total EUI of around 200, that closely approaches the current Tier 1 standard of 170. So I'm just making some observations here. The TEDI requirement currently is 70, and the project is exceeding that. So that's great. It's exceeding the performance requirement. It's down to 60. So that's very positive, actually. The overall greenhouse gas intensity here of 23 or a little over 23 starts to approach the current requirement of 20. So those are just observations. I'm, of course, a fan of high performance. And the reason I'm a fan of that is that if we can lower EUIs and if we can change our system technologies to go lower carbon, for example, towards more electric solutions, we can lower our carbon intensity. And for me, that's the most important number. The lower the to lower the carbon intensity. So I think the panel should comment on the fact that yes, there's an argument to say that balconies provide shading when we do have a cooling load, but the primary load still currently in our city is heating, and balconies do conduct heat out of the building during peak heating. So these are the kind of numbers that we would have to look at if we wanted to kind of push down TEDI values. So it should be, I think that the conversation around balconies does need to factor that in. The panel does need to be aware of that. And so my final, I guess, comment would be if the project could entertain N-wave connection, I think the carbon intensity would go down. So I think if that's at all possible, that would be very advantageous for the atmosphere. So thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I believe that completes the full list of the panel. So I'm going to try, given the time, to.
But George, did George get to?
No, George declared a conflict at the beginning. I don't believe George is still there, is he?
Yeah, I
no.
think George declared a conflict. You're right.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Okay. Let me try and summarize an awful lot of very, very good, helpful comments here. I think where I want to start is that you've heard a lot of strong support from members of the Waterfront panel and the City panel about what's been called how to deal with a very large, complex project on a metropolitan scale, as many people have referred to. There's strong support for how the various pieces have been organized, trying to integrate very diverse uses in a very progressive and positive way. I think every time this project, I see this project, I'm just sort of blown away in terms of the scale and the magnitude, and I realize this is not going to be completed tentatively till 2028. So now's the time to address all these kinds of issues. The number of people living there and working there has been referred to in the past as equivalent to the city of Gravenhurst, the entire population of that city. So it's a big, big project. In terms of the commentary on specific areas, I'll try and group them under public realm, ground plane, landscaping, heritage, sustainability, and reference to materiality. With respect, I guess the most consistent comment about the public realm is that there seems to be a pretty consistent feeling that more generous space is needed to be devoted to the public realm, given the scale and the magnitude of the project and the number of people that are going to be obviously on this block. Now's the time, especially given what we're going through with COVID, to plan ahead and maximize the opportunity for people to gather in numerous places and opportunities throughout the block and throughout the project at grade. A feeling that the public space needs to be more robust, more opportunities for a variety of circumstances, and a couple of comments about the sun and shadow studies would be very helpful to understand, where you can capture the maximum exposure of sunlight given the height of the tall towers and make those public spaces as usable as possible in summer and spring and fall in particular. Some comments made for sure about more details would be appreciated about the soil volume, landscaping, the relationship to infrastructure placement under, to make sure that those conditions are in fact maximized and improved. Comment made regarding the width of the sidewalks generally, but in particular on the lakeshore, feeling that it's far too small, again, for the scale and the magnitude of the people that are going to be on the site. In terms of the ground plane, I think there's been pretty strong support and recognition that you've handled the servicing and the parking strategy quite well. It's hidden. It doesn't take up very much space in terms of the street level at grade, and it seems to work as best possible under the circumstances. Some suggestions regarding the ground plane, also related to the public realm, that it would really be helpful to see these blocks in relation to the adjacent blocks, in terms of thinking of this as a continuous and porous network of public spaces, not only throughout these blocks, but how they relate and connect and align to the public realm on the adjacent blocks. Various suggestions were made, I think, that were helpful on Freeland Street, that essentially, if it could be considered more of a Werner, given the function of the school and the daycare, and that presence and opportunity to accommodate a large volume of kids coming and going to the school and daycare on Freeland is important, and you want to try and minimize the vehicular conflicts that would exist on that. So again, that speaks for wider sidewalks, increased public realm on Freeland, and considering it as a different type of street than perhaps it's perceived now. A couple of suggestions made about maximizing light penetration into the school and the daycare through modifications to other elements of the building, I think are helpful. And in terms of the retail facade, I think most people appreciate the strong presence of retail on Harbor and other side streets, but a suggestion about the finer grain treatment of those facades is something that would be much more welcomed. In terms of the related to those comments about landscape, one of our members made reference to one of the consistent philosophies of Waterfront Toronto, which is lead by landscape. And this is an important consideration for the new park. I think we all support the fact that retail uses have been taken out of the park, but we don't want to see the park come into being in 2028. It should be planned and integrated and developed along the construction schedule for this huge project. And the park should come earlier rather than later for obvious reasons. And it should be designed, it should be commissioned. That process needs to get underway and not left to an afterthought. In terms of the Heritage Muse, several comments I thought were quite positive. People obviously like the idea of that muse, but several suggestions made about that this is a very unique opportunity that needs to be captured and maximized. One panel member made reference to the Calatrava passageway from Bay to Yonge as a sort of dramatic statement and example, but I think that's actually quite appropriate. I think this Heritage Muse has the potential to become an unbelievably special, unique place, provided a couple of things happen. One is to make it much more of a pedestrian place, and to recognize that, yes, cars may be allowed to penetrate it. Some suggestions made how to minimize that, emphasis of making the actual muse wider, increasing the public realm, more sidewalk width on the south side in particular, next to the retail was mentioned, and perhaps pinching the entrance at either end so only one car could get through. All those kinds of strategies, I think, are useful to pursue, because the Heritage Muse is again, something that'll be quite new, quite special, and a key feature, I believe, of this site. Other suggestions regarding the muse about looking at how to perhaps handle the columns and the pillars and the elevator cores in a different way, because they seem to diminish now from the heritage facade. Again, a reference to the sun shadow studies was mentioned here. A lot of people weren't quite convinced that there actually will be sun penetrating in there, but you know, the proof's in the pudding, and it would be great to see those sun and shadow studies. So a lot of comments on improving the Heritage Muse, making that a much more pedestrian-oriented, Werner kind of special place. In terms of sustainability, various comments made by various members about thermal bridging, the problem with the projecting balconies. It has to be recognized. Think of this project It won't even get built for another 8 years in its entirety, but think of it 20, 30 years down the road and where we're going to be with respect to climate change and the carbon footprint and energy efficiency. So suggestions made about building as much flexibility into the building now to accommodate those inevitable needs and changes in the future. And also a suggestion made, which I think would be wonderful if it could be achieved, of exploring the connection, potential connection with N-Wave, given the magnitude and the scale and the size of this project. Last sort of area I think I want to touch on is there were some comments made regarding sort of the landmark quality of this project. Huge towers, very tall, will be seen from a great distance. And I think I sense the feeling from members of both panels that they wish they would have had an opportunity to provide more commentary on the architectural treatment, the materiality of the towers, suggestions made about color, playfulness. These will be really, really big, important towers. And I think, and I've said this before with other matters before this panel, I think the last thing we need is, 7 or 8 more gray and beige tall towers that look like everything else. And so there's a unique opportunity there that can't be lost. So I think I've tried to capture most of the comments that have been made, a lot of valuable comments. I think people have expressed strong support for the strategy, for the site strategy and the resolution of the complex issues. Where there are difficulties, and many suggestions are in the areas of the public realm, the ground plane, and the heritage muse. So at this point, Peter, I'm going to end my summary and turn it back to you to give you an opportunity to comment on what you've heard, and then the panel will take a vote after that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Those of you might be aware that I've had issues in the past with the design panel and taken exception sometimes with the way it's proceeded. But I have to say that the bulk of commentary given today, the vast majority of it, I would say, is some of the most helpful commentary I've ever received at any design panel. So I mean that sincerely. I think this is, someone's called it a metropolitan scale. I had a recent conversation with Greg Linter talking about the city of Toronto, the granularity of it, basically in its neighborhoods. And as Bruce Courbear is fond of saying, Toronto is almost a completely intact Victorian city. And so when we deal with these huge projects, it's harder for us, I think, collectively to really assess their impact and what is important to them. And in my conversation with Greg, we talked about South Core is really the only place in Toronto where we've actually experimented with this kind of metropolitan lack of granularity scale. So all of the commentary on that, I think, is very, very helpful. I know my clients are listening on this, but it's also very helpful to get that input, to be able to go back and reconsider aspects of this as we move forward. So I really honestly and sincerely appreciate all of that. It would take me half an hour to go through all of the comments that I particularly thought were great, but I'll just leave it at that. So again, thank you very much. I approached this session with great trepidation, and as I said, I think it was very, very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Peter. As our custom at this point in time, the panel does need to take a vote, and I'm open to commentary on that. But given what we have heard, my sense is a vote of conditional support is what I think, subject to all the comments and the suggestions made about improving the public realm, the ground plane, the sustainability, the heritage muse. I won't repeat all those, but that those were the key things that we wanted to see addressed. And so I would put that motion before the panel and welcome discussion. Does anyone wish to have any comments?
Seems appropriate to me. This is Eric.
Okay. All right. I'm willing to take the vote, and I'll simply go down the list of the panel members so there's no misinterpretation. I know Betsy is no longer with us, but she's on a phone call.
Paul, I was actually able to listen to the phone call and the panel went so long, I was able to come back.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. So we're taking the vote of conditional support, Betsy. How do you wish to be recorded?
Yes, conditional.
Okay. Claude?
Conditional, and I will also do for Nina.
Okay. And yes, she had to go. Peter?
He had to go.
Yeah, he's off.
Peter
He's gone. He had to go.
Okay. Bridget?
Yes, conditional support.
Okay. Fadi?
Conditional support.
Yeah. Eric?
Yes, conditional support.
Yeah. Jana?
Conditional support.
Okay. And I think Pat had to go. Is that right? How about Jeff?
Yep, conditional support.
And Kevin?
I agree. Conditional support. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes this item. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Peter Clues, for a very thorough presentation, and thank you for your comments. I hope you will take our comments to heart because they're meant with very good intentions.